What are the differences in theme between the book Lord of the Rings and the films? I think this is an interesting subject. By theme, what I mean is, what are the big things that motivate the writer and are presented by the film as important? I don't mean every single character arc. I don't mean every single plot event, though of course they all feed into the themes. And of course, in one way, every part of that is part of the theme, isn't it? What I mean is, what are the big high-level things that are interesting? And it's a relevant question because adaptation involves change and it involves a new vision. It has to be a different thing because books aren't movies or whatever else. And a really extreme version of this, there are a few other extreme versions you could think of. The Shining is one, but look at Blade Runner compared to Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which is a weird and pensive novel which deals pretty openly with Philip K. Dick's ideas about Gnosticism, about the soul, and about the nature of reality. And Blade Runner is a film. It is about kind of identity and reality, but it's a film about the nature of humanity, of what being a human is, and kind of whether you can know about yourself, and about the fragility of life and the way in which what was there can be destroyed. There's no actual electric sheep. This is the thing. The reason you changed the name is because there's no electric sheep. There's no thing about the simulacrum world that they now live in the future on old Earth, decaying Earth. That's not there at all. The aesthetic is brought over, but the aesthetic is turned a lot cooler, and the theme becomes this much more. It's a much more kind of pathos-riven reflection on human identity. And here, I think there are big differences in some key themes between book and film. Just to repeat, I like the films a lot. I love the films. I'm pro-films, I'm pro-book. I see them as different products. I think they are. They're achieving different aims. And because it's relevant, there's a thing that things that are cut here that are big thematic points, and I'll talk about this, are things that you can understand why they're cut. You might not agree, you might prefer something different, but you can understand why they're cut because they're not necessarily very cinematic for the kind of project that Peter Jackson had in mind over his 9 hours, originally planned 12, 13 hours, as is. As an example, the obvious example is Tom Bombadil. But as a related example is the 17 years in the Shire or whatever it is, between events, between the going away of Bilbo and the leaving and the departure of the company of the four hobbits, is that those aren't very dramatic passages for a adult and young person aimed action thriller film, or an action adventure fantasy. They're both quite slow or odd. They're both they're both pointing at a different kind of story than the story that Jackson was telling. So you can understand why it had to be cut. It's very hard to adapt Tom Bombadil, and the long gap makes the stakes seem smaller, even though they're not. It's just literally Gandalf has to go and research stuff, and it takes him a long time to work out what's going on. Now, that does mean that things are going to change, because certain things that feel important or take up lots of space, Tom Bombadil was 3 chapters in Fellowship, are just going to go. They're not going to be there. So the film's going to be different at the end. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to identify some key themes in the films, and then talk about key themes in the books and a way in which some of those key themes are drastically different. I would say the 2 key themes, or the 2 key arcs, let's say the 2 key arcs in the films are to do with Frodo and Aragorn. They're not only to do with that, there are many other stories. But you have Frodo go from being an innocent, basic kid on the cusp of adulthood to going through many things, maturing, and then finally being so cripplingly injured by war. The war, the real thing is both the injuries and the trauma, the mental trauma he's picked up on his way to destroy the ring, and Aragorn coming into his own. The 3rd book is called The Return of the King. It matters that and Two Towers points towards some of the same issues around the War of the Ring and the way in which Aragorn becomes the leader of the Free Peoples in the key Southern theatre, for that. Those are the two big things that happen in the film that really matter. And thematically, what's that about? Well, we see for Frodo and Aragorn, it's about friendship, the Fellowship of the Ring. It's about the idea that you need each other to succeed. The idea that boundaries have to be broken down, boundary between... and these are things that I'd say, drawing on the book, absolutely, this isn't weird stuff that is invented. But, breaking down boundaries between dwarf and elf, and boundaries between Rohan and Gondor that have come up, and between Gondor and the North, between the idea of the kings are gone and this guy's now claimed to be the heir of the king. Boundaries need to be broken down and alliances made. And that is actually a Tolkienian theme, the idea that people of good conscience must come together in true alliance, an open alliance. And it also, the Aragorn stuff also points us to, but that also operates at the level of Sam helping Frodo. That is a microcosm of the macrocosm of the need for friendship and alliance. You have, I guess, with the Aragorn stuff about providence and possibly about monarchy and kingship. That is there, which is recapitulating the film to a degree. You have stuff about the small being used for important tasks, which may shock the world. The Perionath, it's the hour of the halfling, pretty much, as Elrond nearly puts it. I think those are big themes in the films. They are there in the books, and they're big themes in the films. And I think also, the classic good versus evil, and the need for steadfastness in front of that, because you see how Saruman and Denethor fall, how Gollum is tempted to and from evil in that, and that there are great evils to defeat. I guess there's a little bit of stuff environmentally as well with the destruction of Fangorn. There's obviously a big thing about the lust for power, which is important that both Frodo and Aragorn resist. So when we look at those two arcs, which are the big plot points and big character arcs, we can see all these different themes coming out of it, particularly around the need for friendship, the need to that power isn't important, things like that. Somewhat environmentalism, somewhat breaking down boundaries. That's the themes, I think, in the films, or many of the themes. There are many themes in there. I think there's wonder and beauty, isn't this a wonderful place? Lorien is a good example. There's courage, it's the hour of men, is a theme from the book that comes a bit through in the film, not always. You look at, the elves turning up at Helm's Deep. But the idea that there's a need to take responsibility. The book does have many of those, all of those themes to some degree, but particularly, some of them are strong ones. The idea of friendship is very important to Tolkien, and Frodo and Sam are pivotal in both, and their friendship is pivotal in the way in which that survives the stuff with Gollum, and Sam becomes a ring bearer, and that general thing of the need for loyalty and friendship and camaraderie and brotherhood. That is definitely a big theme in the books, because it's the same with the three hunters of different species or ancestries or whatever who become great friends, and with Gandalf, an angel, they become friends with an angel who is a jolly fellow who looks after them. The book, however, I think it's very interesting that two things are interesting about the themes of the book that are wholly absent from the film, and they're interesting because in the book they're very significant. One is Tom Bombadil. There are 3 chapters to do with him, and he's mentioned a couple of other times at the Council of Elrond and at the end. And the other is to do with the Scouring of the Shire, and this is a critique that does come up, is a critique from people who are not foolish, that I've listened to. They're not otherwise idiots. Like, I don't like the films because they miss out the Scouring of the Shire. Why do the halflings go? Well, many reasons, but in significant part because the world needs protecting, and that starts with the Shire. It's an issue of seeing in the mirror the potential destruction coming, the things that might happen with Sauron in charge, and then those prophecies being fulfilled in Saruman, Sharky coming to the Shire, and doing bad stuff. and there needing to be a scouring, that they've gone half a world away to destroy a ring and they've had to come home and destroy its last evil effects. That's the the Scan of the Shire is the point of them going away. It is the coda to the book because it explains why everything's happened at some level, and I think that's that it's interesting. Those two things, this very big bookending thing, and the stuff to do with Tom Bombadil is removed, and they're removed in both cases. I think chiefly, I assume, because the issue of cinematic, how cinematic they are. Like, it's much better with the Scouring for them to end with everything amazing at Minas Tirith, and then to start to get through the very final extra goodbye scenes, particularly going around the Grey Havens. The Scouring of the Shire, they advert to with the vision in the mirror of the Burning Shire. Okay, we need to go away to help that. But the idea that there is a messy process coming out of it, and there is a time after the war, though in this case it leads into another small war, and which also sees the apotheosis of Merry and Pippin, of course. Merry and Pippin come into their own in the Scouring of the Shire. They are now men, they're now grown-ups, relevant for Pippin particularly, who goes away underage, and they lead the liberation of their people. They have to finally win the victory for their own people as well as for the rest of the world. And with Tom Bombadil, is that it's an important theme because, and this is the thing I try to explain to people, is a key line is, he's the master. Tom here is the master. Oh, what's he the master of? Well, himself. Nothing else. He's not in charge of stuff. He can tell stuff what to do in a specific way, but he's not in charge of a place or people. He's in charge of himself. It's why the ring doesn't affect him. It's why he can be trusted with it, because it's so unimportant that he'd just he'd lose it. That's the accusation. And I think the fact that this is set early, this is the first threshold, they go through the forest, things go wrong, Tom rescues them, they talk to Tom, they go out again, Tom rescues them, they move on, and they are now more rounded and ready to fight and do stuff. And they particularly protect Frodo at Weathertop. That's the next chance, and they do it. But Tom is in some ways a model. The fact that he is in control of himself. Needing to be in control of other stuff in Tolkien's worlds leads to your own degradation. Being in control of yourself means that you are free from those things. And importantly, he is then exactly the person, Tom is, who brings other things into order, especially if you add in the Badger Brock of the ballad, the poem of Tom Bombadil, which you can listen to Tolkien read on YouTube. So when you especially bring in that, and you're like, okay, so he is just able to say, no, you're not meant to do this. No, this is not how it works. Behave. He sets them into order with music, the music of the Aina at some level, and he can do that because he is in control of himself. So these things, both the moral theme of a big moral theme of the book, is explicated in the Tom Bombadil section, and a plot issue is dealt with the first threshold. And with the Scouring of the Shire, the stakes, the ultimate stakes, and the importance of home is in that, and those are both removed. And I think when I look at that, I think those are two very big themes for Tolkien. The importance of home and the need for self-control, for is it temperance, continence, I guess, is very big, and it's exactly what the ring is about. And those sections are where he communicates that and how he communicates it. And the films take some of that stuff, like the need you need to resist temptation, but that's a fairly in a funny way, that's a fairly weak theme in the book, in the films, because it's just cancer. The ring is just cancer. That's how it works. You just get worse. It's a Jane Thor kind of thing, isn't it? So yes, you can see they draw some of that in, but it doesn't quite work in that case. In the case of the Scouring, you set up the stakes, but it's not pressed on, and there's no apotheosis for the characters. It also leaves out, therefore, some of the coolest stuff in the books. But you see why cinematically they're removed. You see what other themes they've chosen to emphasise, and they don't completely succeed at doing these other things, but these high-level themes they've chosen work very well. But it is a thing where the book is a very different experience, not just because it's prose, not just because it has more detail, but because Tolkien frames things at the start in the Shire and just outside the Shire with Tom, and at the end in the Shire, in a way that does inform everything in between. That is the difference between why Denethor goes in terror and anxiety to the Palantir to get knowledge, whereas Aragorn can go with humility to dictate terms. That's what I think anyway, when I compare the film and the book of Lord of the Rings, and I think, well, how do their big themes, the big ideas they're communicating come across? And there are lots of similarities, but as I say, two key differences of what was cut from the film. Some of the most important stuff in the book was. Do you agree? Do you disagree? What things do you think are the big themes of these books, these films? I would love to hear your thoughts, so tell me in the comments. Till next time.